All right. Well, good afternoon to everybody. For anyone who doesn't remember, because it's been so long since we've actually seen each other, I'm José Campbell. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I am one of the writing tutors at the Peter Academic Resource Center. Today's topic is about thesis statements. I want to try covering some of the basics. As many of us know, thesis statements were an area of opportunity in essay number one, and which is why I decided for it to be the first one we tackle today. In hopefully a series. I'm hoping to get at least 2 or 3 more of these before essay 1 is due, or essay 2 is due, excuse me. So we'll see how much traction we can get on it. So right on to go. So like I said, this is going to be, we're going to start with the basics, like where we're going to define it. We're going to go through some of the motions just because I want to make sure that everybody's 100% comfortable with the topic. So I want to do the basics. What is a thesis statement? Simply put, it can be 1 sentence, sometimes 2. It really depends on how complex you want to put your idea forward. And in academic writing, you typically want to stick to 1, but it's not necessarily wrong to do it in 2. The thesis should state your main idea or argument of your essay. It is most commonly placed at the end of the introductory paragraph, but not always. Now, this is going to depend largely on the length of your paper. For something in the 15-plus page length range, you're going to be looking at taking the first 2 or 3 pages to lay out the background before you really get to your thesis. Now, for our purposes, for essay number 2, we'll be looking at a max of 1,000 words, if I remember correctly. So you should aim to address your thesis in the opening paragraph, the total of which should be, I would say, 5-ish sentences. Now, your thesis lets your reader know what to expect. A well-crafted thesis will function as a roadmap, not only for the reader, but for yourself as the writer. If you take a look at the prompt for essay 2, it reads, how does Eugene Sledge's account of his military service in the Pacific complicate the classic idea that the Second World War was a good war, fought for a clear and moral purpose? How did this impact soldiers such as Sledge during the second half? I know that some of us probably haven't quite started thinking about the crafting of essay number 2 yet, since it is a couple of weeks away. And I don't think we haven't done the reading yet for it, but we're going to start thinking about these things because a lot of the themes will carry over from one section to another.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I've done the prompt. I've read the prompt. I've done a lot of the reading. Mm-hmm. It feels like there's so many ways you could go that I don't know where to start.
And that is very normal. So first off, I feel the same way often because that's part of it, right? Because each of us are going to read these entries and take something different away from it. So it's really going to be your opinion strongly backed up by evidence in Sledge's book. So there's obviously going to be wrong answers. But if what you argue is an argument that Sledge has and that you can back up by pointing back to Sledge's work, then you're good to go. And we're going to talk about a little bit more of the complexities of planning out the thesis in a little bit here. So no, you're 100% fine. Anybody feel free to jump in whenever. So we're going to break down this prompt real quick. And I didn't put it up on a slide. I should have done that. I have it on my notes. Break down this prompt. So there's really 2 questions, right? But it's really only 1 because the second half requires critical thought on the first half. We know that when that your thesis will have to directly answer the question, and then your body paragraphs have to work to strengthen your assertion in your thesis statement. So I want everybody to keep it in mind as you start thinking about essay number 2. Remember that I'm happy to help you with any of the matters related to essay 2 as much as I can. I have the office hours, and you can reach me through email relatively easily. So I'm going to jump in here. As I stated a few moments ago, the thesis statement is the basis for your entire essay. Every paragraph, along with every topic sentence, should relate directly to your thesis. After all, the point of the entire essay is to prove that your perspective on the prompt is backed by historical evidence. So like we said with Sledge, I think everyone, and even with essay number 1, where even there was less room to work with in terms of evidence because it was based off only 2 sources, no two essays were the same. People may have mentioned even similar parts, similar evidences to support their thesis, but everyone had their own take on it, which is where you really get to put in your own personal flavor to your essays. So the last thing to remember before we move on, and I realize I'm clicking ahead of myself, is to move on, is to remember that the thesis statement is absolutely the most important part of your essay. So, no pressure. So let's talk anatomy. The thesis statement is composed of two parts. First part, topic, subject. You got to know what you're talking about. And your thesis statement should tell the reader precisely what you're doing. They shouldn't be able to read your thesis statement and still be confused about what you're trying to talk about. The second part is your opinion based in fact, like I alluded a little bit before. So a quick activity, we can take just a couple, 2 or 3 minutes to think about it. And feel free to post it up on the chat or say it out loud, whatever you're most comfortable with. But think of something. It could be absolutely anything you feel strongly about that you can support or disprove with 2 or 3 pieces of evidence. So, for example, for me, coffee is the best choice for a midday pick-me-up because it's natural, delicious, and smells great. That's a thesis statement. A very bad one, but it's a thesis statement. So let's go ahead and take about 2 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, and you can either type it in the chat or say it out loud. Come up with something that you want to support with 2 or 3 pieces of evidence. I should have put in the Jeopardy music right here. That would have been great.
Okay, I have a couple that you could talk about throughout the book.
Yeah.
So there's brotherhood, but the Marine divisions and how strong they are together, and that's pretty obvious. And then the acclimation to the surroundings, the climates, the way of fighting, and Sledge talks a lot about the training, helping them get ready for when they go over there. So he mentioned that a lot in boot camp, and when he is over there and he sees new recruits and he realizes they didn't have the same kind of training, that kind of thing. I think that was a key factor in helping him.
Okay. And I know it's a little bit putting you on the spot, but off the top of your head, how would you craft that into even just a very simple 3-part thesis?
Okay, now you put me on the spot.
I know. Oh, I see.
I don't know. Jose.
No, that's fine. Which is why I was looking at doing anything outside, even just, it doesn't have to be history, just to come up, just to get us kind of thinking in that area. And let's see, we have a comment here from Spencer, so I'll read it out loud. Sac State is better than UC Davis, which is really funny because one of my friends is sitting by me and she works at UC Davis. Sac State is better than UC Davis because Hornet is superior to an Aggie. Sacramento is better than Davis, and our football team beat them handedly last season. It's a Mustang, she would like to clarify. His name is what? Gunrock. What's ours? Herky? Okay, well, that's a good example of a thesis there. You have an idea. You're supporting it with what may be argued as fact, which is the point of the thesis. A thesis should be arguable. Someone should be able to look at your thesis and say, I disagree. Now, how they follow up that disagreement shows you whether or not they're right or wrong, whether or not they're a good arguer, but that's beside the point. So, Spencer, excellent job on that. That's a great one. We have another one here by Jordan that reads, ice cream is the best dessert during the summer because it is cold, a variety of flavors, and cheap. That's a good example as well. Now, I'm going to make a comment that we're not going to get into too much, something that I found recently in my writing that my professor has pointed out. When we look at parallel structure, this is going into advanced writing, which I plan to cover hopefully soon here. But when you make a list sort of item like this, you want each item in the list to have a parallel structure in terms of, so you said it is cold, that's a 1-word descriptor. Then you say a variety of flavors, that's 3-word descriptor, and cheap, back to 1-word descriptor. So to maintain parallel structure, you would look at each descriptor to be either 1 or 2 or 3 and have them all be the same amount of descriptors. But it's still an excellent example of a basic thesis statement, which I think is a great point to move forward. So thank you everybody for participating. And for the purposes of our class, I am keeping track of everybody who participates in some way or another for your opportunities to earn that extra credit. My example, another one that I found here, Park is a great college resource because of their experienced staff, skilled tutors, and welcoming environment. I'd like to make a comment right there again on the parallel structure. Can you guys see my mouse cursor? Question?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, perfect. So experienced staff, two-word descriptor, skilled tutors, once again, and welcoming environment. So just something to think about that is advanced level, but that when a professor or someone else reads your work and they see that parallel structure, they go, oh man, that looks extra good. You know, so kind of gives it that little je ne sais quoi that some writing needs. So, but thank you everybody for sharing there. And let me get back to my notes. Okay, so formalities. Now, these are getting like a little bit more into the nitty gritty of thesis statements. But keep in mind that when crafting your thesis statement, it is a central idea of attention within the essay. When someone asks, what's your paper about? You should be able to answer that question in some form of restatement of your thesis, if not just outright reading out your thesis. So if Jordan was writing a paper on ice cream and someone asked him, hey, what's your paper about? Ice cream is the best dessert during the summer because blah, 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 blah. He would know with that thesis statement, the reader knows clearly what the paper is going to be about and the points that they're going to make. So yeah, that's that part there. It should tell the reader what position you're supporting about the subject in the essay. In my very simple example earlier, I asserted that I like coffee. If it was and like I said, if it was a paper that I was writing, not only would that tell them the reasons why I think coffee is good, but also is going to provide them a bit of a roadmap in the order in which the evidence is going to pop up. So when we're talking about the levels of crafting the thesis, it doesn't have to be this perfect, beautiful thing the moment you write it down. And with many of you, I've shared before, the intro is often the last thing I work on when working on a paper. But the thesis is definitely the scaffolding that helps me build the rest of the paper. So it is something you start thinking about earlier. Another aspect to keep in mind, your thesis statement should be a complete sentence that is specific, succinct, and suggestive of the organization that followed in the essay. So like I hinted just a couple moments ago, if your thesis statement has cold, variety of flavors, and cheap, that's how the rest of the paper should progress. The first body of evidence that you present should be about the fact that it's cold and how that's refreshing on a summer day. The second part on the availability of flavors, and then the last part on how it's cheap. And let's see, making sure I got all the notes here. All right, so that's good here. All right, so like I said, we're going to talk about the brainstorm on some of the process of the thesis statement. It doesn't always have to come, like I said, first in the writer process, but it's good to develop it early so you can use it as a guide for your paper. Now, what's great about it as you're going along through the process of writing it is that it can change 100 times if you need to. Is like Keely pointed out, there's a lot of evidence in the reading so far that can help you answer the essay, the prompt for essay number 2. And so as you go along, you pick 3 real quick, and then you read a little bit more, and you decide, this new piece of evidence supports it better. You can easily change it up, which is why it's great to start working on things ahead of time to allow yourself that freedom to be able to change your mind as you're writing. Now, like I said earlier, no pressure. Thesis is the most important part, and it's often the hardest part to really get through. But I think it's important to keep in mind on how fluid it can be, and that it's not a set in stone thing. The moment you come up with the 3 things, it can still change. Now, this right here is a little kind of formula for anybody who's a little bit more mathematically inclined amongst us. Definitely not me. But here's a basic way to kind of start thinking about your thesis. I'm going to write about blank. You should look at the prompt and break down what it really looks at. In prompt number 2, we're looking at the fact that Sledge complicates the idea that World War II was a good war. So you say, I'm writing about complications of a good war. I'm going to argue, show, or prove that blank, 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 blank. And as you go along, you fill in those blanks with your reading and with your assertions. So think of the thesis statement as a formula. Just as Z equals MC squared, subject plus opinion based on evidence equals a thesis statement. I want to give a moment to pause here. Does anybody have any questions or anything like me to clarify as we're moving along? All right. So, moving on. I am a big fan of visual aids. So here's something I found. It's called the introduction triangle, moving from broad to specific. Nothing too complex, but what we want to get at is that in your thesis statement, the pieces of evidence that you present there should be relatively broad so that in your body paragraphs, you get into the real meat and potatoes of your argument. You don't want to give everything away on the first date, if you know what I mean. You want to let them know that there's more to come. You want it to be interesting. And so the first few sentences should be your attention getter. Engage the audience. Start off with something that's an interesting statement about the time. When we're looking at World War II, you can say something like, historians have often thought of World War II as a moral war that was used to fight the forces of evil coming from Germany. Well, that's interesting, right? That's the kind of thing you see in a trailer for a movie. But the movie never gives away plot points, at least not good trailers. So that's the kind of way you should think about your thesis statement, the trailer to the movie that is your essay. The next 2 to 4 sentences, depending on overall length, should paint the picture of the historical moment you're discussing. Being in history class, some of us history majors, we often assume that everyone knows the exact period we talk about. You would be surprised how many people wouldn't be able to tell you when World War II happened. Unfortunately, we can't assume that everybody is as savvy with the material as we are. So in those 2 to 4 sentences, you spend them painting that picture that really puts the audience into that era you're talking about. And lastly, your thesis statement should, doesn't have to be, but should be the last sentence in the paragraph to tease just the right of information that keeps your reader engaged and eager to read on. Any questions on this so far? All right, so now I'd like to move on to an overall fundamental look at the outline you should be creating for your essay, incorporating your thesis statement. This can be a mental outline. I myself don't often write outlines down when I'm creating academic work. I know I'm definitely in the minority in that. Some of us make outlines and drafts, do many, many drafts to end up coming up with this nice single thing. That's not my style, but I know that that's the most common style, so that's why we want to go over it here. So once you have an idea of what that thesis statement wants to be, right, because it's not necessarily going to be quite there yet, but once you know what it wants to be, you start thinking about your introduction and how you want to orient the reader to help them identify the focus and purpose of your essay. And it should be relatively in that order. Orient the reader with that engaging initial sentence, identify the focus of your paper, and then state your thesis at the end of it. Throughout the body, the very basic formula, right? Most of us are familiar with that 5-paragraph essay style, essay outline. And this is essentially what that emulates, but understand that I stopped at topic sentence 2 just because I was running out of slide space. But it can be as many paragraphs as you need, particularly in academic writing in the upper division level like we're in. We don't need to stick to that 5-paragraph format because in 1,000 words, it's often, those paragraphs are going to be too big. So feel free to break them down depending on your style of choices. And finally, you want to end it with a conclusion and then, importantly, a restatement of your thesis that summarizes your argument. You can't just copy paste your thesis because it's not going to make sense. Your thesis was a way to set up your information. But in this conclusion, you want to assert the reader that you are an expert in the topic you're covering and that your opinion is based in evidence and, hopefully, therefore, correct. We have someone else jumped in. Okay, Austin came back in. Welcome back.
I'm so sorry. I had a little discussion with my other group, my other class.
You're absolutely fine. Appreciate you coming back. And
okay.
So Now, where does this thesis statement go? It's something we've been looking at. I know I've said a couple of times. It goes at the end. The first says the introductory paragraph should contain an attention getter to help engage the reader, and the overall introduction paragraph of an essay should provide the reader with a general survey of information of the subject being discussed. In our case, what's going to be the idea that sludge complicates the idea of a good war. So, once all necessary and relevant background knowledge is stated, I said stated, that should be stated. It's typically then that a thesis statement can be declared in the last part of the introduction. After the thesis statement, an essay has body paragraphs. Each body paragraph should be 3 to 4 sentences long and will include a topic sentence and a concluding sentence. Now, we're not going to get too heavily detailed into topic and concluding sentences today, but know that I do plan the next workshop to focus in on topic sentences and how we can use them, because where a thesis statement works the hardest, that one sentence or 2 sentences works the hardest in your entire essay, each topic sentence should be the hardest working sentence in each paragraph. And the concluding sentence should give the reader a direction of where the next topic is going to. So it's something to think about. The next workshop we hold will be looking at this a little more closely. Now, keep in mind, each topic sentence, and therefore each paragraph, should directly relate back to your thesis statement. As you're writing and as you're creating your outline, you should be able to look at a paragraph without looking at any of the other paragraphs around it and know exactly which part of your thesis statement evidence this relates to. So in the example that Jordan gave us about ice cream, if there's a paragraph in there that talks about, let's say, the availability of ice cream, how easy it is to find, well, that doesn't really have anything to do with its temperature, its flavor, or its cheapness, right? So we would look at a paragraph like that and go, well, does this really belong here, or can it be restated in another way to fit one of the other topics? We'll get into more of a focused look on paragraphs like that in the next workshop, but it's something to start thinking about as we go along. Does anybody have any other questions so far?
There's one question I have. It's for the last essay. I don't know if you saw my thesis statement before. I don't know if there's anything just for like what I could do try again or try and make more sense to connect more of the body paragraphs. Have you looked at my first essay?
I haven't read it in detail yet, but that is definitely something I'd be glad to meet with you with one-on-one, where we can flip the essay and it can be a good exercise in fixing the emphasis. We can look at how we can reframe it and then use those lessons to transform over to essay number 2.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Okay. So pretty basic, but of course, after the body paragraphs, your concluding paragraph is located at the end of this. I know that's super basic, but that way you can't say I didn't tell you. Your conclusion paragraph should restate the ideas in your thesis, but in a different way. Conclude your thoughts and let the reader know why you have successfully proven your point. All right, so a little bit more into how a thesis should be written. I feel like we've covered a little bit, quite a bit of the overall fundamentals. I know a lot of you are probably already familiar with some of the things there, but for those of us who, sorry, I lost my place here. So how about for those of us that have a firm grasp on thesis statements and how to construct them, but lose points because we were told it's too simple? Or I know a common one, I said number 1, like this is only a list of things and not a true thesis statement. Simple or complex, right, is a good question we have to ask ourselves. Now, spoiler alert, more complex is generally better, but where the magic happens is trying to find an area to strike that balance between succinct and complex. And I know that's a terrible answer, but we're going to take a look at this in some examples. So kind of a formulaic way to looking at it, right? A beginning thesis statement, a very, very basic one. A is B. You think You assert that A is what it is because B is what it is. Well, a better thesis statement would read A is B because X, Y, and Z. Now you're giving reasons why your subjects are what they are.
Yeah.
A more complex thesis statement, although C is D, A is B because X, Y, and Z, where you're giving a lot more detail while still being succinct and letting the reader know exactly what your stance is. We're going to talk about these highlighted words, although and because, in a bit, and they're just the examples that I chose so that we can focus in. But really, the idea here is going to be to elevate that writing without going into unnecessarily complex territories.
Yeah.
And how words that we're already familiar with can really be put to work heavily in our essays.
But for the thesis statement, does it have to be like a little bit like some simple in a way, or because if you make it way too complex, then it's gonna be hard for the audience to know like what you're talking about. If it's too simple, then no one's gonna like have interest of reading it.
Yeah,
And
no, you're absolutely right there. It's finding that balance.
Yeah, it's balance.
Between the two. Let me see. I have actually something specific on that. Yeah. When you look at your thesis statement, the statement needs to inspire a reasonable reader to ask, well, how or why? Would a reasonable reader not respond with, well, of course, duh, who cares? So that's that balance we're trying to find. If you write a thesis statement that is way too simple, they're going to look at it and go, well, yeah, of course ice cream's good because it's cold. Yeah. You would want to get a little bit more detailed into that. You might want to get into how it's refreshing. Part of its temperature is what makes it refreshing. So, on that topic, there's a few words that you want to avoid. Well, I'm going to give you some tips on things you should try to.
So you think that we could use the same words, but in some ways we could try to make it a little bit more, I say, complex, or some complex words. So we're technically say the same thing when it gets like the simple, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, there are ways to use our regular language, but make it sound academic.
Yes, that was just trying to say.
Yeah. So
yeah, that makes sense.
For example, words you want to avoid, right? And it's a cliche, but you never use never, because we can't with 100% certainty ascertain that whatever you're describing has never happened. So you want to avoid general phrasing or sweeping words such as all, none, every, never, those kinds of things. If, for example, with SA2, we say no one thought the war was not a moral war, or everyone thought it was a moral war, that's not precisely true. For every war there's ever been, there's always been people who protested. And that statement I just made would be a terrible one as well.
Yeah.
Because we can't say always, we can't say never. It is
reasonable make it too broad, right?
Yeah, that'd be way too broad. I would be, well, one, putting words in people's mouths, but secondly, yeah. I don't know that every word has been protested. Logically, I can assume it has been, but without evidence, words are nothing. So a basic thesis. This is a just all right thesis. Community colleges are an important part of California's educational system, right? We're looking at A, community colleges, but going back to that formula from earlier, community colleges are B, important to California's educational system. I myself, as a transfer student, strongly believe in the place and the importance that community colleges hold. But if I was writing a paper about it and I used this thesis statement, it wouldn't be necessarily wrong, but it would barely count as all right. More complex thesis, so we're starting to upgrade it here. We're getting into that, maybe C-B range territory. Community colleges are an important part of California's educational system because they are a more effective, more cost-effective way to attain a degree. Classes are smaller, and they prepare students for the demands of university life. That's a pretty decent thesis statement. If I was a professor and I was reading this, I wouldn't have much problem with it. It asserts the writer's opinion. It provides, in this case, 3 pieces of evidence that I can then assume are going to be in that order throughout the body of the essay, and that each one are going to harken back to the 3 points made. Does that make sense to everybody?
It makes more sense because even though the community colleges are important, that's really good thesis statement. And then like why?
Right.
And,
So the first one and the second one, they're saying the same thing, right? Fundamentally, they're both saying community colleges are an important part of California's education system.
and
But
then
then, go ahead.
and each idea that you mentioned, that's going to be part of your body paragraphs.
Exactly. And so, oh, whoops, thought I had. Oh, that's right. Okay, the third one's over here. Oof. A very complex thesis statement, and I wouldn't say very complex, but this is where we're talking. This is a true academic sentence. Although many students want to go straight from high school to a four-year university, community colleges are an important part of California's educational system because they're a more cost-effective way to attain a degree. Classes are smaller than at most four-year universities, and they prepare students for the demands of university life. That thesis statement right there is one long sentence, but uses strong, attention-grabbing words that tell the reader precisely, without a shadow of a doubt, what the writer thinks.
See, that's where I get confused, because you said it was the last two sentences, and what you wrote is good, but it just seems like you said one long sentence. But because it's so good, are you not going to be docked because it's one long sentence?
No, it just purely would depend on the quality of the sentence. This is where they get into that complex territory, and we want to try to find that balance, because in this sentence, there's no unnecessary language. Every part of this first of all, continues to set up the background of it. And when someone asks you, what's your paper about? This one sentence can tell me everything I need to know about the paper. And that's kind of what you want your thesis statement to be able to do. If someone asks you, what's your paper about? Your thesis statement, even if it's in two sentences, that's 100% okay. That's really more of a style choice. But the thesis statement should be able to provide a little snapshot, just a little Kodak moment of what your whole essay is about. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Like, let's see. I think my thesis statement before was some kind of similar, with like kind of like what you mentioned, like the basic, and then like because of these reasons. Mm-hmm. Because one of the tutors that I went to, they mentioned that you need to like explain like why. And I kind of thought, because I kind of like was confused before, but now I know why I have to include like more specific details other than just saying a basic thesis statement.
Yeah. Yeah. Is everybody good?
Yeah, I'm good.
I will consider silences as okay, and we'll no worries. Don't feel pressure to chime in. All right. So, like I said, I know it's difficult, right? And particularly because we're not in person. I had a couple things in mind where it was going to be a little bit better in person, but right, we're working with what we got. Now we're going to get into some of the words that I mentioned before. Although is a conjunction that means in spite of the fact, even though, and it's helpful in connecting and comparing or contrasting different but related ideas. It's a word that we use often in our everyday language, which is what I was hinting at earlier. But when we put it into an academic sense, it helps us tell the reader that we're aware that someone else is going to think something different than what we think. As Keely pointed out earlier, there's going to be a lot of evidence that you can use in Sledge's work to answer this prompt. So when someone reads Keely's essay and looks at the three examples that she chose, they're probably going to be different than what someone else chose. But because she qualifies it with a word like although, it leaves itself room to be argued with, which is what you want out of a thesis statement. A thesis has to be arguable. Someone has to be able to disagree with you, because you're not using those ultimatum statements like never or always, stuff like that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Now, because is also a conjunction word that means for the reason that sense. And it is useful for offering insight and introducing supporting details for a claim. So when you're asserting why ice cream is a great summer snack, you're telling them why, and they know that information is coming when you use a word like because. I know that one's a really simple one too, but you can't say I didn't tell you.
Could you go back to the other slide really quick, please?
Yeah, of course. This one?
No, the one before with the although.
Oh, yeah, let's see. There we go.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Take a moment to take a drink of water. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Put them in the chat. Another thing to keep in mind for everybody, if you want to be able to take down some of the information on this slide, depending on what you're using to for Zoom, you can screenshot it and then be able to get back to it. Oh yeah, and that's also, I think I mentioned it earlier, but this is going to go up on a YouTube channel, and I'm going to put an announcement on our class page onto where that YouTube channel is. So if you end up wanting to, for whatever reason, listen to it again, or someone else in the class, someone else in the class wanted to attend but couldn't, we can direct them to that. So I'll put that in an announcement in Canvas probably later tonight. Oh my gosh, it's already 5 o'clock. All right, so some more useful tips. Thesis statements that are too broad in general will lead to an essay that lacks focus. I know myself, I have fallen into this trap several times where either maybe, I didn't do all the reading like I should have, or I don't really know what I want to say, and I write a thesis statement that's just messy and unfocused and doesn't even know what day it is. You want your thesis to be narrow to a focus enough to support your argument, but be able to be expanded on as a thesis, through the thesis statement to make it as specific as possible in the rest of the essay. So using words like while, although, because, there are, and I'm working actually on putting together a little kind of a cheat sheet on using some words and some phrases that can help you transition a little easier that we're going to be looking at in the next workshop that I put together. So here's another example of a pretty good thesis statement that can use some work. While the rise of industrialization led to the expansion of global trade relations, the conditions of working class people deteriorated because of X, Y, and Z. And so we can fill that in with a variety of different sources that can prove our argument, or at least make it arguable for someone else to be able to disagree with. And then that's where we have, discourse and debate. Let's see what's happening. Oh, this is the last slide. That's why it's not going anywhere else. Okay, so we are pretty much at the end here. Does anyone have any questions for me?
I have one question real quick. So I know Professor Collins said that there might be like extra credit availability to do this session. Like, I don't care about the extra credit, but if there is this one right now or no?
Yeah, no, this is one of the opportunities to earn some extra credit. I do believe he's putting a limit on it, right? Because we wouldn't want people to just hunt for the extra credit. We want people to do the work. But yeah, I've taken note of everyone that's been participating, and I have everybody's names here, and there's going to be video evidence of people that participated. So yeah, I got you.
Okay. And is there going to be more sessions of this in the next couple of weeks, or?
Yeah, there won't be anything next week because we're spring break, but I'm going to be using some of that time to prepare. Let me see. I'm going to look at the calendar real quick. I honestly lose track of days now that we're not going to school. Like, I don't even know what day it is. It's Wednesday. Okay, so yeah, this week here we're off, and we're supposed to be doing a big class discussion on the 7th, right?
Well, I think it's the 8th, and we don't come back until the 6th. Dr. Collins said.
Yeah,
that's right. I'm confusing my things here. I have a class discussion on the 7th. Yes, it's the 8th with you guys. So you know what? I might.
Wait, is it? I think, did he delay the paper?
Yeah, the paper's now due the 17th, I believe.
Yeah, it's the 17th.
Yeah, it's
right, but we're having a discussion on the 8th about it.
Correct. I believe we're going to be actually, Dr. Collins and I are going to be talking later on this week to figure out exactly how we're going to do it, or at least my part in it. He already knows what he's going to do. we're figuring out how to incorporate me into it since I can't roam around your desks like in class. So right now, I'm hoping to have something up on the 6th. Worst case scenario, it would be Wednesday or something. I'm not 100% sure, but I would like to have another one up before you guys have to turn in the paper. So, and then the next one will focus on topic sentences and paragraph structure a little bit more. So,
I think
exciting stuff, right?
Yeah, I think one of the things I kind of struggle the most is thesis statements connecting through the body paragraphs. I think that's like one thing that kind of like struggling from the last last essay.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that we'll be looking at some more, and we'll see how we can help you with it. And then keep in mind too, with the more specific requests we can organize. These workshops are a little bit more all encompassing. So some of us might have learned nothing today. Hopefully we learned a little something. But this is to help, the majority of people in the majority of way. When it comes to specific questions, we can meet together one-on-one through Zoom right now.
Now, your office hours, like if I were to come in at 12:45 and we were talking, that would be private, right? Or unless somebody else needed you, how does that work?
So the way I have them set up is so that anyone with that ID code can pop in. So anyone in our class could pop in, but it becomes very, very obvious when someone does pop in. And I have the, actually, no, I don't have that setting turned on. I don't have the setting turned on for